Hello, good evening, everyone. Dear friends, these lectures are coming to you on the request of my PGs from KMC Manipal. I had promised them that I will take 100 lectures before they appear for MS exams, sometime in April or May. Today, I'm going to talk on a very important topic, that is intrapartum fetal monitoring. EFM, that is electronic fetal monitoring, and beyond EFM, how to interpret that, and what are the interventions you must take. This is a day-to-day topic. A postgraduate and a resident in OBG should know this inside out. There is no excuse for not knowing this, and this has a very important impact on the survival of the fetus. Imagine the mother has carried the baby for 9 months, and in the intrapartum period, she loses the fetus because of our negligence, because of our misinterpretation, because of our lack of intervention. So that is not acceptable at all. So that's why I feel this is a very important topic. So the topic is intrapartum fetal monitoring, EFM and beyond EFM. I'm Muralidhar Pai, currently working as Dean in Sikkim Manipal Institute of Medical Sciences, Sikkim. Formerly, I was HOD at KMC Manipal. The CETON multidisciplinary work group has decided that the highest risk for obstetric harm is because of these 5 things. I always teach this to my postgraduates. Number 1, injudicious use of oxytocin. This is in a logical order. There is no need to remember this. First thing, we are inducing labor or augmenting labor with oxytocin. So if there is injudicious use, there can be an obstetric harm. The next thing, failure to recognize fetal distress. This could be because of hyperactivity of the uterus or because of an acute situation on a chronic hypoxic intrauterine environment. When you detect fetal distress, you have to take appropriate action. If there is inappropriate use of vacuum or forceps, there can be harm to the fetus. Now, the next thing is failure to perform a timely cesarean section. Again, can lose the fetus. Failure to properly resuscitate an asphyxiated baby is the next thing. So they are all in a logical order. So we must remember these 5 things so that we don't have any mishap in the labor. We don't lose any fetus in labor. But today I'm going to talk on this particular aspect, that is failure to recognize fetal distress. How to recognize fetal distress using electronic fetal monitoring or other things. So the topic is intrapartum fetal monitoring, EFM and beyond EFM, interpretation and interventions. What is the goal? The goal is to detect developing fetal hypoxia, to prevent subsequent acidemia and long-term irreversible neurological damage in the newborn. So baby may be alive, but if there was hypoxia during labor and acidemia, there can be irreversible neurological damage. And that is really very distressing to the mother and later on to the baby. The normal parturition itself is an asphyxiating event. During contraction, there is a decrease in uteroplacental blood flow, decrease in PO2 and pH, and an increase in fetal PCO2. This happens in every labor, even in normal parturition. However, levels don't fall outside critical threshold. If the fetus is healthy, it can still manage that, and labor contractions are normal, baby can still survive this physiological phenomenon. Placental reserve, of course, should be adequate. Fetal distress is likely to occur when there is compromised fetus in spite of normal uterine contractions, or exaggerated uterine contractions despite healthy fetus and adequate placental reserve. So it has to be a perfect combination, otherwise there can be problem. The methods to detect fetal distress are mainly two. Number one is intermittent auscultation. Other one is continuous electronic fetal monitoring. Let us see how these two have been compared with each other. Electronic fetal monitoring is not a new thing. It's been there for last 60 years. Compared to auscultation, EFM results in higher operative vaginal delivery rates and increased rate of cesarean delivery. Obviously, because we tend to diagnose more fetal distress and to intervene more often without significant reduction in perinatal mortality. This sentence is very important. That means sometimes we are overcorrecting, overcautious with electronic fetal monitoring. NICE fetal monitoring guidelines in 2001, which has not changed much. There was no apparent difference in perinatal death rates between the two groups, that is EFM and intermittent auscultation. What does it mean? Intermittent auscultation is as good as electronic fetal monitoring, provided we are honest, we are there, we are really auscultating once in 15 minutes in first stage and once in 5 minutes in the second stage. This is what ACOG and AP in 2012 have said. Intermittent auscultation is good enough for low-risk pregnancy. It is good enough for high-risk pregnancies also, but they have put A in the bracket. That means before, during, and especially after a contraction for full 60 seconds. Other day, I was telling that you must count it for full 60 seconds, because if you count for 15 seconds and multiply by 4, you can be wrong because of beat to beat variability, which I'm going to explain again in subsequent slides. Continuous fetal monitoring in the low-risk pregnancies is okay, but in high-risk pregnancies, it's a must. It includes evaluation of tracing every 15 minutes. Just connecting the probes and going for a coffee is not acceptable. You should sit in the labor room and review this every 15 minutes. And if there is any deviation, it is better to take a trace. That will save you in the court of law. I have made a rule in Manipal that every 2 hours, you must take a tracing for 10 minutes. Of course, you have taken tracing right in the beginning. You have to take trace whenever there is fetal distress. That will save us. Evaluation intervals in first stage, once in 15 minutes. And of course, in high risk, A and B should be kept in mind. Whereas in second stage, it is once in 5 minutes, because suddenly things will change in second stage of labor. And C has been added, evaluation of tracing every 15 minutes if you are using electronic fetal monitoring. And you must know that the fetal heart placement changes. Accordingly, you have to change the probe placement. Continuous electronic fetal monitoring in high risk for fetal hypoxia or acidosis is very, very useful, and it is a must. What are those conditions? As far as mother is concerned, previous cesarean section, preeclampsia, PROM, multiple pregnancy, medical disorders, antepartum hemorrhage, and maternal pyrexia. As for the baby, if it is FGR, preterm, post-term, breech and oligohydramnios, continuous fetal monitoring is better in these situations. And as far as intrapartum situations like induction, if you have done with prostaglandins especially, electronic fetal monitoring is better. Augmentation with oxytocin. Meconium stained amniotic fluid. Meconium stain always does not mean fetal distress, but you have to be very, very sure, and that can be done only with continuous electronic fetal monitoring. Bleeding in labor can be abruption. Regional anesthesia, you have to do continuous electronic fetal monitoring. It is also offered to patients sometimes when you have previously monitored with intermittent auscultation, but you suddenly see that FHR is more than 160 or less than 110, better to resort to continuous fetal monitoring. If there are deceleration, again, intermittent auscultation might miss them, so better to connect continuous fetal monitoring. If there is intrapartum risk factors that develop, suddenly if there is some fetal distress or meconium stain like a thin meconium stain like a, better to switch over to continuous fetal monitoring. Intrapartum fetal monitoring has got three components basically. Number one is terminology. Number two is interpretation of it. And finally, intervention, that is management. Let us look at these individually. As far as terminologies, number one is baseline heart rate. All of us know this from undergraduate days, but again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. Then is variability, beat to beat variability, very, very important aspect of heart rate. Accelerations, as far as labor is concerned, we don't care much about accelerations now. It's only in the antenatal period when there is no stress of labor, accelerations are very important. That's what is actually looked for in a non-stress test. But in labor, all the present guidelines have removed this part. Decelerations are very, very important. I'm going to talk in length about each one of them. And then changes or trends over time is very important. Now, let me elaborate on normal fetal heart rate. It's an irregular horizontal line. Even movie people have understood whenever they want to show a person dying, the line becomes straight line. Straight line is not good. Why that happens? It happens because there is series of closely spaced points, each representing an individual heart rate calculated from the interval between two R waves in the fetal ECG. Somewhat like this. As you can see here, from one beat to another beat, the time is not constant. Here it is 138, here it is 139, 138, 137, goes down to 136. What it means is, in the first 15 seconds, there may be actually 40 beats. In the next 15 seconds, there may be 30 beats. In the next 15 seconds, there may be actually 28. And in the last 15 seconds, there may be 55. In fact, the gap between one beat to another beat is not always constant. That is exactly why you should not count for 15 seconds and multiply by 4. You will go wrong. And this particular variation is because of the chemoreceptors that are present in the carotid arteries. They detect the oxygen and carbon dioxide saturations, and accordingly, they will give the signals, and the centers will guide the heart to either increase its heart rate or decrease its heart rate. That means we are alive. That means we are alive to the hypoxia. That means our autonomous nervous system is working well. And that is a good sign. When the brain is soaked in oxygen, then it works better. So when the heart rate is nicely dancing, we are happy. We also can dance. Baseline heart rate, all of us know that 110 to 160. Tachycardia, more than 160, but it should last for more than 10 minutes. Maternal pyrexia can cause this. Initial stages of subacute fetal hypoxemia, the tendency is to increase the heart rate to overcorrect itself. Administration of beta agonistic drugs or fetal arrhythmia, that is SVT or atrial flutter. This is a dangerous sign. We should be very clear. When the heart rate goes beyond 180, it is more dangerous. It is very close to death. All of you know this. When the candle is about to go off, it will burn brighter. So similarly, when the baby is about to die, the heart rate goes to 180. Don't be happy. It is going for a ventricular fibrillation. Bradycardia is less than 110, which lasts again for more than 10 minutes. Again here, if it goes below 100, it's a cause to concern. A normal fetus in a post-dated pregnancies can certain times have bradycardia. Maternal hypothermia is equally dangerous as hyperthermia during labor. Whenever maternal temperature is, let's say, X, intrauterine temperature is X plus 1, and that is not good for the baby. Hypothermia is also bad for the baby. Administration of beta blockers instead of beta agonists can cause bradycardia, and fetal atrioventricular block if there are bundle blocks. Now I come to the next important aspect is variability. Again, variability shows that the baby is doing well. It should not be a straight line at all. The fluctuations in the baseline that are irregular in amplitude and frequency, both. Amplitude means the number of beats per minute, and frequency is how often it changes. So as you can see here, this is almost like a straight line. There is no beat-to-beat variability. It's absent, which means the autonomic nervous system is not happy, which means there is no enough oxygen, which means the baby is heading towards acidemia. Here, as you can see, there is beat-to-beat variability, but it is less than 5 beats per minute. And this is the normal one, which is 5 to 15 beats per minute. And the next one is more than 15 beats per minute. Probably here again, baby is signaling that it is in distress. So this has to be there. Then only we can say it's a normal CTG. Variability factors, the influencing factors are, the normal one is 5 to 25, 98% non-acidotic baby. You can be rest assured. Decreased, that is less than 5 beats per minute, more than 50 minutes is not good. It shows that fetal metabolic acidosis, CNS depressants, fetal sleep cycle maybe, or pre-existing neurologic abnormality. When it is increased, that is saltatory pattern, as I showed you in the previous slide, more than 25 beats per minute, it is incompletely understood, may be linked with recurrent decelerations when hypoxia evolves rapidly. There is no time for the baby to correct itself, so it is beating fast. Don't be happy again, as I'm saying, it may be heading towards ventricular fibrillation. As I said already earlier, accelerations are like abrupt increase in the fetal heart rate from the baseline. After 32 weeks, it is usually 15 beats per minute, lasting for 15 seconds. Before 32 weeks, it is usually 10 beats per minute, lasting for 10 seconds. However, absence of acceleration in an otherwise normal intrapartum CTG is of uncertain significance and unlikely to indicate hypoxia, because as such, the baby does not move much during labor. And when the baby does not move, obviously there won't be accelerations. It's a simple phenomena. When we run, our heart rate increases, and that happens only in the antenatal period for the baby when it can nicely move. With the uterine contractions there, baby does not move much, so we don't see accelerations much. And if you don't see accelerations, there is nothing to worry. That's why it has been removed. I will show you this later when I talk about the interpretation of it. Now I come to all important decelerations. These are very, very important, and all of us must know how to read this. No matter how many times we have heard about this, no matter how many times we have interpreted this, there is still sometimes a problem and we would have missed the deceleration. So be clear about it. A transient slowing of fetal heart rate below the baseline level, that is more than 15 beats per minute. Suppose it was, let's say, 140. Now it goes below 15 beats per minute. That is, it goes down to, let's say, 125, or that is also already deceleration. Though it is in the normal range, please try to understand. Yes, 110 to 160 is normal. But if the base was 140 And if it goes down to 125, already there is a slowing of 15 beats per minute. If it goes to 120, on its own, it looks like normal heart rate, but you must know it has gone below 20 beats from the baseline. That is deceleration. You should not miss that. And if it lasts more than 15 seconds, it is dangerous. What are the types? Early deceleration, variable deceleration, and late deceleration. Now, what is early deceleration? It is symmetrical with the nadir coinciding with the peak of the contraction. All of us are well aware of this. As you can see here, the peak of the contraction coincides with the nadir, that's the lowest point of the deceleration, because the deceleration starts when the contraction starts and it's over when the contraction is over. It is only because of, synchronous contraction. It's like a mirror image. In the graphic, it is very, very clearly seen. They coincide with each other. It's mainly due to head compression. When the head compression goes off, if you change the position, this may go off. Next is variable deceleration. It is variable in appearance and timing. As you can see here, the appearance here, it is not very deep. Here it is deep. Here it is shallow, but quickly resigns. And here it is before contraction. Here it is after contraction. So there is no actually rhythm or rhyme. So it's variable in appearance as well as timing. So if I have to show in a line diagram, so here it is before contraction, and here it is after contraction, almost coinciding. And here it is quite deep. Here it is not deep at all. Can you see that? So baroreceptor mediated response to increase arterial pressure is the cause of variable decelerations. It reflects also umbilical cord compression. So again, this will change when you change the position. There is another phenomena called shouldering in variable deceleration. That is acceleration before and after deceleration. As you can see here, I am showing this particular one. There is one acceleration there, then there is a deceleration, then there is another acceleration. So this is called shouldering. As you can see here, one peak and another peak here. So this is like you have raised the shoulders before a dip. So umbilical vein is occluded first, causing acceleration, and umbilical artery is occluded next, causing subsequent rapid deceleration, and it comes back for overcorrection. So their presence indicates that fetus is not at hypoxic and adopting to reduce blood flow. That means it's a good sign. That's why I put it in green. But their absence is worrying, as it suggests that fetus is becoming hypoxic. So I put it in red color. So shouldering is good. Absence of shouldering is not good. That means the baroreceptors in the umbilical vein and the artery are not working properly. And or maybe the hypoxia is so profound that it has lost its acumen. So look for shouldering if there is variable deceleration. So variable deceleration resolves if mother changes the position. Now I come to the most crucial, late decelerations. So as you can see here, the deceleration starts somewhere after the contraction has started. See here. And its nadir, the lowest point, is after the peak of the contraction. And it is taking a long time to go back to normal, even though the contractions are over. You can make out more clearly when I show you the line diagram. So here it is, the onset, nadir, and recovery. The onset, nadir, and the recovery occur after the beginning of peak and ending of the contraction, respectively. So it's very clear here. So see this picture. The contractions have started here. This is the peak. Here contractions are over. But where is it starting? Somewhere here. And nadir is beyond the peak. and contractions are over here, but it is still going on. So that is late deceleration. It reflects a chemoreceptor response to fetal hypoxia. Then there is something called prolonged deceleration. This is a big, broad deceleration where the decelerations that last more than 2 minutes, but less than 10 minutes. Pathological is one which is more than 3 minutes. So it is indicative of acute fetal hypoxia, and there's no excuse if you don't intervene immediately. If the head is on the perineum, you may go for forceps or vacuum, but any other situation, you are still better off with a cesarean section, even in second stage. Sinusoidal pattern or deceleration is a smooth sine wave like a rangoli pattern in the fetal baseline with a frequency of 3 to 5 minutes persisting for more than 30 minutes. As you can see here, it is like a beautiful rangoli. It's going in a sinusoidal pattern. Now, this indicates severe fetal anemia. RH isomerization may be the cause of anemia. Fetal-maternal hemorrhage is another. Twin anemia polycythemia syndrome TAPS and severe hypoxia can also give this picture. So there is neither deceleration nor acceleration. It's all like a sine wave. That is bad. That shows there is fetal hypoxia. There is fetal anemia within. This baby will not do well. So you have to intervene. So how to interpret all these things? The IPFM classification, FIGO 2015, has simplified. They have removed acceleration here. There are only 3 components that we talk about: basal heart rate, variability, and deceleration. So as far as these 3 concerned, you will call it normal when the basal heart rate is 110 to 160, variability is 5 to 25 beats per minute, and deceleration either no deceleration or if it is there, non-repetitive. The FIGO is so smart, they have not talked about intermediate, they have straight away talked about pathological. What is that? Basal heart rate is less than 100 beats per minute. Variability is decreased for 50 minutes, increased for 30 minutes, sinusoidal for 30 minutes, repetitive more than 30 minutes, or one prolonged for 5 minutes. This is too much. We don't wait for 5 minutes. We wait only for 3 minutes. Now, suspicious is one. Look at smart sentencing. Abnormality in any of the 3, but not severe enough to be pathological. They have not defined it. It is abnormal, but not as severe as less than 100 and no repetitive decelerations. So interpretation is, if it is normal, no hypoxia. If it is pathological, high probability of hypoxia. In between, low probability of hypoxia. What's the intervention? If it is normal, no intervention. If it is pathological, urgent action, expedite delivery, as I said, head on the perineum, forceps or vacuum, otherwise cesarean section. But here, in suspicious variety, rule out correctable causes, secondary investigations, maybe fetal blood sampling. It is not done routinely nowadays. In fact, in many places, it is given up. So NICE guidelines in 2017, they use the same 3 characteristics: basal heart rate, variability, and deceleration, but they have just changed the wordings. Instead of calling it normal, they say reassuring, same criteria. Here they have defined clearly non-reassuring, just taken lowest point as 100, 100 to 110, highest point as 180, 160 to 180. This is called non-reassuring. And other things, they are slightly tweaked. So more than 30 to 50 minutes and more than 25 bit variability up to 30 minutes. As far as deceleration is concerned, it should last for more than 90 minutes or more. Abnormal is almost same as in FIGO. That is fetal heart rate less than 100 or more than 180. This is always told by all of us in Manipal. Look for the fetal heart rate more than 180. That's also bad. Rest of the thing is almost same as FIGO, but only thing is instead of 5 minutes, they have told us 3 minutes. And I think this is sensible. We go with this. Interpretation, they have gone to another slide, another table. They have made categories: normal, suggests a low-risk fetal acidosis. What is the criteria? All features are normal or reassuring. Suspicious suggests a medium risk of fetal distress or acidosis. One non-reassuring feature of any of the three characteristics, and two normal or reassuring features. As far as pathological CTG is concerned, it suggests a high risk for fetal acidosis, one abnormal feature or two non-reassuring features. It keeps on in the incrementals. CTG indicates need for urgent intervention, means there is bradycardia or a single prolonged deceleration with baseline below 100 beats per minute persisting for more than 3 minutes. So abnormal CTG action to be taken. RCOG has beautifully made an acronym called MOTHERS. M for meconium. Whenever there is abnormality, look for MOTHERS. This is taught to me by my daughter, who is a teacher for RCOG. Those who are interested in doing RCOG, she is a mentor there. M for mother. O for oxytocin. Look whether you are giving it more or less. T for temperature or toxemia. H for hyperstimulation or hemorrhage. E for epidural. R for rate of progress, rule out CPD, and S for scar. Now to this mother, I have made an acronym. As I was teaching the PGs, I suddenly came up with a good acronym, and that is SOIL. SOIL is also, after all, Mother Earth, isn't it? So what's the action to be taken? The acronym I have developed is SOIL. S for stop oxytocin. O for start oxygen. I for give IV fluids. And L for lateral position, left lateral position. See whether there is an improvement. If there is no improvement, that means thing. Now, RCOG has got another rule, what is called 3-6-9-12. What is that? 0 to 3 minutes, call for help. So probably this mother is heading towards either an instrumental delivery or a cesarean section. Think of delivering her. 3 to 6 minutes persisting. Perform SOIL, stop oxytocin, start oxygen, start IV fluids, left lateral position. Now shift the patient to OT. In Manipal, we have an advantage that OT is next door of labor room. 6 to 9 minutes in the OT, if the deceleration persists, try one last ditch attempt to deliver the baby by instrument, either forceps or vacuum, whichever is comfortable to you. This is basically to avoid category 1 cesarean section. But if it is persisting beyond 9 minutes, do off a cesarean section, you are better. What are the limitations of EFM? It can't detect following pathologies like brain infarct, fetal stroke, and rupture, and there is a lot of human factors. So EFM is not a reliable diagnostic test, but it is an exceptional screening test. If normal, it excludes ongoing hypoxia at injury, but if it is abnormal, we have to be careful. So 40 years of EFM has told us there is an increase in incidence of LSCS and failed to improve any neonatal outcomes. So beyond EFM, we have meconium staining helping us. It suggests that there is acidosis, poor condition or infection, or it needs resuscitation. But the meconium staining, not significant if FHR is between 110 to 160. There are other benign causes of meconium like breech and post-state. Meconium in the absence of other signs is not a sign of fetal distress. So there is something called internal fetal monitoring that developed, but it is given up because of its problems. Scalp pH, as I said, it is given up. And then lactate is also given up. Scalp stimulation, something like what you do stimulation during NST, given up because it has got misinterpretations. Vibroacoustic stimulation is also given up. Meta-analysis of all those things told it is not good, so given up. Doppler, they tried, but during labor, it has got little role. Pulse oximetry, given up. In fact, the company itself stopped the sale. EFM with expert system, that computerized evaluation is definitely good. So this can be utilized in your center. Then there came ECG waveform analysis. The rationale is mature fetus exposed to hypoxemia develops an elevated ST segment. So progressive rise in T wave height can be expressed as T is to QRS ratio, what we call STAN. So this is also been there for last 10 to 12 years, but what they have told is that it has got no significant differences in clinical performance. So EFM and STAN are very similar capacity. Even Cochrane review said fewer operative deliveries in babies with encephalopathy, severe metabolic acidosis. Findings supported, but advantages to be weighed against disadvantages of needing scalp electrode. So it has not really stood the test of time. NICE guideline says it is not recommended as a standard NICE standard procedure. If you don't have STAN, don't worry. It has got a lot of limitations. A good electronic fetal monitoring is good enough, or a good sincere doctor checking every 15 minutes is good enough. So these are the reasons why STAN requires more RCTs. So sum and substance of what I said is use of EFM has reduced the perinatal mortality, but at the cost of increased cesarean section. Its role in reducing cerebral palsy is debatable. Meconium staining is significant only when associated with decelerations. Others have been given up, and intermittent auscultation is good enough in low-risk pregnancies, but in high risk, you should use EFM. A computer software to analyze EFM may overcome human errors. Addition of STAN may help improving the outcome along with judicious interventions and probably the way to go. Thank you very much. I hurried up because I got an alert that I'm approaching 40 minutes. Bye for now, and let us meet again tomorrow with a new topic. Whatever topic you want, you can please inform me. I will take those topics. Thank you very much. Have a good day.